The House Education Committee will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Colazar.
Here.
Representatives Churches.
Present.
Shannon.
Present.
Stone.
Here.
Weiss.
Here.
Glanville.
Present.
Conlon. Edwards.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Green. Markkinen. Paquette.
Here.
Wenzel. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 10 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Shannon moves to approve the minutes from the October 10th meeting without objection, so ordered. A couple of quick announcements here. First of all, today we will be capping committee at 1 hour, so if you are testifying, please keep that in mind. And the first order of business is we're going to take up Senate Bill 395 from Senator Polehanke, but first I would like to offer an H1 substitute. And just to quickly summarize what is in the substitute, the percentage of teacher and administrator evaluations based on student growth will be set at 20%. It removes references to public school academies where they would not be applicable and adds them where needed. Student learning objectives provided by the Michigan Department of Education and defined as measurable long-term academic goals informed by available data that a teacher or teacher team sets at the beginning of the year for all students, and removes language referring to reasonable and just cause standard of review when issuing any findings and remedies in arbitration. So with that, I need a motion to adopt the substitute. Representative Churches makes that motion. Will the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to adopt the substitute, Chair Colazar.
Yes.
Representatives Churches.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Stone.
Yes.
Weiss.
Yes.
Glanville.
Yes.
Conlon. Edwards.
Yes.
Wagella.
Yes.
Green. Markkinen. Paquette.
Yes.
Wenzel. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 10 yeas, 0 nays, 0 pass. Substitute H1 is adopted.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite up Senators Polehanke and McDonald Rivet and any staff that wants to join them to testify on behalf of Senate Bills 395 and 396.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairs, and members of the House Education Committee, especially for doing a special committee hearing. Really appreciate it. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you about Senate Bill 395, which will modify the performance evaluation systems for public school teachers and school administrators. My legislation will make teacher evaluations fair and constructive. I thought it'd be beneficial to also have this up on the screen as we scroll along. I know that I need to hear something and see something to let it sink in, so that's why we're doing that. And you should all have copies at your desks. I think it's really important to talk about the history of adding student growth to teacher evaluations, and I would like to go over that short history now. In 2011, as part of the Snyder administration's tenure reform package, which allows teachers to be fired if they're rated ineffective for 3 consecutive years, student growth was set to account for 50% of a teacher's annual year-end evaluation by 2015. In 2015, the law was changed to student growth accounting for 25% of a teacher's annual year-end evaluation for 3 years, and then 40% in the 2019-2020 school year and beyond. Currently, 40% of teachers' annual year-end evaluation must be based on student growth and assessment data. The other 60% must be based on an evaluation tool, which is your typical observation, feedback, dialogue, goal setting. Within the 40% student growth portion of a teacher's evaluation, if the teacher teaches core content areas, that would be English, math, science, or social studies, in grades and subjects in which state assessments are administered, like the MSTEP, PSAT, SAT, 20% of the evaluation must be measured using state assessments. The remaining 20% of that teacher's evaluation must be measured using alternative means, for example, like the national NWA, iReady, or STAR, local or alternative assessments. Here are the problems that teachers across the state, and I was one of them just about 6 years ago. There are problems with the addition of student growth, and it can be summed up in the sentence, testing limitations and the spirit of the law are incompatible. Here are some reasons why. The state test, the MSTEP, cannot measure student growth by itself. like a NWA can, and therefore requires an average of at least 3 years of student test scores for one teacher's evaluation. This means that a teacher is not being evaluated on students she currently has in the year in which she's being evaluated. Different cohorts of students have different variables that are sometimes out of a teacher's control, and you think about COVID. Next, using a composite school-wide growth measure for evaluating teachers in non-tested subjects like art and music is unfair and flawed. Outside of the SAT in grade 11, state assessments like the MSTEP, PSAT, and benchmark testing hold questionable value to students. It would be improper for a teacher to provide incentives for trying hard, like especially on a post-test. Yet teachers' livelihoods depend on how seriously students view these tests. The ceiling effect means that with teachers who work with students who tend to get high test scores, think maybe your AP students, it's very difficult for teachers to show significant improvement over time, as often scores are about as high as they can go. Conversely, teachers who work with low-scoring students, many of whom tend to also be poor, are more likely to be evaluated based on factors outside of their control, maybe illness, homelessness, hunger. On a standardized test day, teachers can't control factors outside of school that can affect student performance, death of a pet or a loved one, illness, hunger, fatigue, mood. And finally, there have been no indicators that using student growth in teacher evaluations has made a difference in outcomes for students since its inception. I'm going to depart from the script for just a second. While SB 395 passed out of my committee in the Senate with no student growth, which is my strong preference based on the testimony I just outlined, the suggestion that the bill would not be signed unless it included student growth prompted me to support an amendment to include up to 20% student growth, with no MME standardized test exams and locally bargained. There's too much good in this bill, which I will outline next, for me to not support the amendment. Ratings categories. So there are four big, the big four of teacher evaluations. So student growth was one, ratings categories is next, not in any particular order. In current law, teachers ultimately receive one of four rankings on their annual year-end evaluations: highly effective, effective, minimally effective, or ineffective. These ratings affect tenure, promotion, retention, removal, and layoff recall decisions. Reducing the number of categories from 4 to 3, which my bill would do, is cleaner and more concise and may result in the following: reduce competition among teachers rather than collaboration, reduce intended or unintended unfair application of the rating system within and across school districts, ensure greater rater reliability, reduce lack of clarity as to which teachers need support, which can improve with help, and which should be helped out of the profession. The highly effective category is widely used in some districts while rarely used in others, rendering it near meaningless if overused or perceived as impossible to achieve, leading to job dissatisfaction if underused. As a result, my bill reduces the number of ratings categories from 4 to 3, and we renamed them. We eliminate highly effective, minimally effective, and ineffective. We retain effective, and we add developing and needing support under effective. Teachers who receive a middle rating, developing, will also receive individual development plans so they can have a clear path to become effective. We will assign mentors to teachers who are rated in the developing and needs support categories. The third of the big four, frequency of evaluations. Current law states that all teachers must be evaluated annually, regardless of the ratings category they received on past evaluations. The current annual year-end evaluations of all teachers, regardless of their past ratings, has put great strain on school administrators who argue that they're spending too much time with effective teachers and too little time supporting teachers who are rated less than effective. As a result, we have changed the frequency in my bill to make annual year-end teacher evaluations triannual, every 3 years, after successfully achieving 3 effective evaluations. Lastly, due process. Current evaluation laws do not have any due process mechanism for teachers to challenge poor evaluations. According to Michigan law, after a third non-effective evaluation, a teacher is automatically terminated. This has caused frustration among teachers who would like to challenge an evaluation before they're dismissed. The changes to this bill allow for teachers to have mediation on the first poor evaluation, or needs support in my bill, to determine if the correct evaluation process was followed. After a second evaluation of needs support, teachers can receive binding arbitration on the content and rating of that second evaluation. I'd like to that part of the script is over, but I'd like to address some misinformation I've seen in various platforms, on social media, etc. One piece of or disinformation: that my bill allows teachers' unions to eliminate student growth as a factor in educator evaluations during contract negotiations. False. The newest amendment means that growth will be at 20%. Misinformation. My bill weakens decades-old tenure reforms to make it nearly impossible to remove bad teachers from the classroom. False. Teachers deserve some due process in evaluations. We are not undoing tenure reform. We do not touch tenure at all. Misinformation. My bill removes the state requirement that teacher evaluations include unscheduled classroom observations. This is simply inaccurate. There must be at least 2 classroom observations. One may be unscheduled. In fact, we require that an observer must be in the classroom at least 15 minutes. So we actually strengthen the classroom visits. The principal or whoever can visit as many times as they want. Last piece of misinformation. My bill redefines unprofessional conduct in state law to make it easier for misconduct to not be reported in a background check. I'll try not to be offended that someone thinks I would change background checks in a bill, but my bill does not change fingerprint background checks. My bill more accurately defines what unprofessional conduct is by removing the word misconduct, and I'll tell you why in a second, and replacing it with these words: an act that endangers the safety of any student and directly leads to the separation of employment. So the new language, taking out the one word misconduct and replacing it, will say this: unprofessional conduct means one or more acts that endanger the safety of any student and directly leads to the separation of employment. One or more acts of immorality, moral turpitude, or inappropriate behavior involving a minor, or commission of a crime involving a minor. A criminal conviction is not an essential element of determining whether or not a particular act constitutes unprofessional conduct. And here's why we're doing this. Over time, the word misconduct has been used as a catch-all term to include things like excessive absenteeism. If, you know, a principal saying a teacher is being insubordinate, or some other performance-based issue. My bill does not prohibit a school from contacting previous employers to inquire about a teacher candidate. In the event a teacher leaves one district for another, a school district may provide a teacher's attendance record or discipline records to another district, including misconduct toward another adult. 2 teachers fight in a classroom, or in the teacher's lounge. Sorry. That was an example that was given to me. Further, my bill does nothing to limit the sharing of an employee's personnel record. So if you're at a school and you're interviewing for another school, the school that's interviewing you can get your personnel record. It's a public record. It must be shared with the school district that's requesting it. The public record request just needs to be in writing, and it can be as simple as an email. While some administrators have said it's not common for districts to request personnel records from other districts, I would ask why not? It's a practice that can help employers gain more insight into the employees they're looking to hire. I believe schools should ask for potential new hires' personnel records. With that, I thank you for taking time. I've taken up quite a bit of time. I will take questions. I guess, should I take questions first, then we'll move on to Senator? How would you like to do it? Okay.
Thank you very much, Senator Plohinky, Chairman, committee members, for considering this legislation today. I want to say that my bill, Senate Bill 396, is essentially the technical companion bill to Senator Plohinky's. And I'm not going to take very long. I know it's late in the day, and you have a lot of people who want to testify. But I do want to say that this bill, this language, the teacher evaluation system was actually put into law with really good intentions, right? And frankly, I was working in education reform at the time and was a part of the group of people that were thinking about how to do this and how to do this well. The reality is that since we have implemented this teacher evaluation system, that we've actually seen educational outcomes in Michigan decline. The problem we were trying to solve was not solved by this solution. In fact, in many ways, it was very detrimental. We know better now. We've learned some things. We need to fix it, which is why it was important to me to be a part of this package. I would also say that we are often looking to get inside the classroom to fix what is very clearly a broken educational accountability system in the state. It's a tougher, more complex conversation, but it's one that we need to have. But we can't, the issues that we have in K-12 education, in pre-K education, ensuring that every kid graduates with the potential to do whatever they want to do is not, the solution for that is not found inside the teacher evaluation system. But what this is doing right now is driving teachers out of the profession. When all of us have heard in our districts, regardless of where we are in the state, teachers saying, I'm out, I gotta go. I'm either gonna retire early, I'm gonna find something else to do. And the teachers that I talked to, 3 of them in my own home, a bunch of my kids turned out to be teachers, which is terrific. It wasn't the pandemic that sent them away from teaching. It was that what happened during the pandemic was the last straw. And so we are often creating, with the current law, a structure around teachers that, coupled with an accountability system, that pulls away the art and love of what they were trained to do. And it's time for us to trust them and have an evaluation system like every other evaluation system I have been a part of in my entire career that was meant to make me a stronger professional, meant to make me better at my job. And that's what our evaluation system ought to do. But we also have much work to do, both on the Senate side of the education and the House side on the Education Committee, in order to really strengthen our education system. And I really hope that we do that alongside our teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, senators. And I know Senator McDonald Rivet, I think your time here is limited before you have to go. But so thank you for coming today. First off, I do want to point out that Senator Plohinky, you said something that I think is very important, and that's about the collaborative nature of education. And when we treat it as a competition rather than collaboration, the only one who loses out are children. Would you agree with that sentence?
Right. I mean, school administrators strive to give teachers common planning time because we're supposed to be sharing everything. And when you're, some teachers view it as pitting teachers against each other, and it further, moves them into silos, which is not at all how teaching should be, especially if you're a teacher and the person next door to you is teaching the same grade, same content area. You should be collaborating and doing the same pacing and all that. So, yeah, collaboration is key for teaching, definitely.
Also, I can vouch for the numerous stakeholders you have engaged in this process based on the sheer volume of them that have spoken with me since this bill has come over to the House. So thank you for your work on that.
We've been negotiating this since January 1. Yeah, it's been a long 10 months.
It's a miracle my cell phone lasts through the day. So, with that, we do have some questions. Representative Paquette.
Sure.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senators. Appreciate your work, especially this is a very important issue, teacher eval. I know Senator Polhanke, I think you were Teacher of the Year twice,
Yeah.
2 times, and so kudos to you on that. When I got nominated regionally for that, and then also getting pushed into getting on teachers advisory councils and things like that. I got nominated for some of those. But when I would write my essays or write my materials for it, I always wrote about how the biggest problem that I see us in our world of education is the fact that we do have some educators that are very difficult to remove, who shouldn't be in the classroom, especially in the sense that younger teachers, when they come in, they can be getting paid maybe a third of what some of these teachers who are doing not as good a job are. And so a lot of those teachers leave. I have a lot of friends that left. And so when I look at, and I know the substitute just came in recently, so I was looking at, the redefining of the, effective, highly effective, and then needs support. And so my question comes down to, so if a teacher, and I guess if an eval isn't written out by the admin, then that teacher, even if they're ineffective, were ineffective or are deemed ineffective, they would be deemed effective. Now, could you, I guess, speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, if the principal or a person observing is too lazy to write anything down, then yeah, I guess the default would be effective. But I can't think of an employed principal who doesn't provide written evaluation. In fact, my bill, I believe, requires it, that everything has to be in writing. In the off chance someone doesn't get it in writing, then it would default to effective, but I can't see that happening a lot at all. And I agree with you. Teachers, we had a category. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking of the names of the new categories, but we had one called emerging. And I said no, because there's some teachers who just aren't never going to emerge. It's just not going to happen. And they'd be best helped out of the profession. I do remember, especially in my dad was a teacher in the 70s, maybe 80s, there was a time when it was difficult to remove ineffective teachers. I don't believe that's the case now. I've seen many teachers who are ineffective go. It's 3 years and you're out. And I happen to not have a huge problem with the Governor Snyder's new tenure act. I think 3 years is enough, and if you can't cut it in the 3, then you probably got to go.
Gotcha. And just to build, especially on the misconduct redefinition, if I may. So, like currently, with the way that you redefined it, just curious, because I didn't see the updated language yet, I guess, but in terms of that, we're seeing a lot of intense times, especially after COVID. A lot of people are more willing to snap. I actually, at my school, it was a national demonstration site in project-based learning. We had to co-teach, team teach, and my co-teacher, she went through some heavy things, right? And it really diminished her capacity in the classroom, unfortunately. And so, with this 3-year window, I guess, where did you look to research and how this is good for it within professional development, and to allow that 3-year window, or that the triennial window of not being evaluated anymore, or 30 minutes within 3 years, that's not very much, especially if someone goes down a wrong path or has a misstep. It could really severely impact their teaching quality. So I was just curious as to where that might come from.
The minute you start backtracking, then you go back down to whatever not effective is. I don't even know my own categories. We've changed. You go back down, and then it starts over. Like, once you don't have the 3, effectives anymore, like say you're on year 7 and you're effective all 7 years, you've been evaluated twice, then you slip down. My understanding of my bill is that now we start again. So now, you're going to be observed until you get back effective. When you get 3 more effectives, then you can go to the triennial again.
Okay, thank you. I get really quick question to you about the student growth component. What growth looks like being locally negotiated as opposed to the MSTEP, for example. Can you talk about why that is so important to have the growth be determined at a local level?
Yeah, I'm going to let Senator McDonald Rivet take that one.
So we know that when you are basing it on the M-STEP, it's the notion of growth without not talking about the same group of kids is a problem. But what I've heard from my local superintendents and what I've heard from my local teachers is they want to be able to use the instrument that makes the most sense to them. I'll tell you that my comfort level at the 20% is much higher than Senator Polanki, and we should be continuously debating that, right? That's really an important concept. But the ability to, there's not a scenario where there is a negotiation out of an instrument, or that it will be it's nationally normed, that many times these tests are already in place. So it's just a matter of being able to sit at a table with teachers and administrators and school board members and be able to determine what makes sense for that school.
Thank you. Representative Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the work you're doing on revising the evaluations. It's about time. Coming from a classroom in a Title I district that routinely as a fourth grade teacher, 60% of my students came to me below reading level. With as much as 20% on third grade, 20% on second grade, 20% first grade or lower. And I just kind of wanting to, this is side track, and before I get back to my kind of question, is that those standardized tests don't show a year's growth in a year's time, right? And that my students who come in underperforming will never show the investment and the value added that instruction has happened in that classroom. And so that's why it's so important that we look for those tools that really demonstrate that that teachers are adding value even to those kids who are struggling the most. My question comes out of the how do we help teachers who are struggling? So we got independent development plans and we have mentorship. Is there any requirement for districts and administrators to provide teachers with additional professional development? So if we tell a teacher you're not living up to expectations, go back and get better in your classroom alone. Without providing intervention, without providing role models, without providing instruction on best practices. Any thoughts on what we could do better there?
I mean, the answer is other than the IDPs and the mentors, there is not anything additional in my bill currently.
So remember that level of professional development is also a part of negotiations. But I do want to get back to your earlier point because it gets to Representative Kolazar's question as well. You know, when we look at kids that are several grade levels behind, so let's say you're entering the 9th grade and you're coming in with a 4th grade reading level. Well, it doesn't mean you're actually at the 4th grade reading level. It means that there were key concepts along the way that you missed, and so that's where you're testing in a standardized test, where you test out, right? But the real issue, particularly in schools that have kids that are coming in often, large percentages, many grade levels behind, is figuring out where is that key concept. I mean, most of you have been teachers, so you don't need me to explain this, but an instrument in a school like you're describing, Representative Stone, is being able to use an instrument that can tell whether or not you're getting to the root of the issue that is going to be that leapfrog moment for a student to get to grade level in an appropriate amount of time before graduation. So that's a better answer than the first one I gave.
I welcome multiple answers. That's okay. Representative Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for your testimony, and thank you so much for your work on this bill. And Dan, too, I know you do a lot of work. You've done a lot of work. Thank you for your work on this bill. I just wanted to kind of broaden out a little bit and get a better understanding when we talk about part of the purpose of the reform, or reforming teacher evaluation. And Senator McDonald Rivet, you touched on the fact that, like, clearly the intention was good, but it didn't work. Or if it worked, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. And for a lot of us, both on this committee and others in the audience and others watching who are teachers who have been teaching over the last decade and have gone through this system, for myself, to me, a lot of this has to do with the respect of the profession. And I often felt going through the teacher evaluation process like I wasn't being trusted and empowered to do my job that I went through 4 years of college for, that I went through student teaching for, that I went, took on a lot in order to be able to get to where I was to be able to do that job. And then I had to jump through all these additional hoops that didn't necessarily feel like they were supporting me professionally or helping me be a better teacher, more like I was checking boxes to prove that I was doing my job. And so can you talk a little bit about how your bill kind of moves away from that just box checking and really is more towards helping support teachers professionally in order to be able to improve professionally? Obviously, we want to make sure that accountability piece is still there, but how is your bill different from the current iteration, and how are we moving more towards respecting teachers, empowering them, supporting them professionally to make sure that they're able to do their jobs, and hopefully keeping more teachers in the classroom in the process?
Well, when we first tackled this, I outlined the 4 things that I thought needed to be done. And sometimes to make something better, you have to completely adjust it or take it out. So, the student growth piece is problematic to me. The ratings categories became meaningless. The frequency of evaluations, you're taking principals and evaluators time away from helping. My hope is now, the principals and the evaluators can actually help the teachers who need it. That's one huge thing. It's going to free up so many hours for them, to actually help the teachers that need it. And then the due process. I don't know of any, well, I guess in the private sector, you can be fired for little to no reason. But, in respecting the profession, like and you've invested a lot in this profession, you are owed some sort of due process. I received good evaluations, but one year I was a union rep, and that I didn't get the best evaluation that year. Surprise, surprise, because I was, behind the scenes arguing with the principal, and it was unfair. I did a great job, but that kind of thing happens. So, you really do need some sort of due process, and that might end up being the thing that, teachers appreciate most long after I'm dead is that, if something's arbitrary and capricious, they have a mechanism now to say, hey, wait a second, I think this is unfair. Teachers are owed at least that. So there are, and then the mentorship is new, the IDP is new. So hopefully those things will all coalesce. And I was a 5D instructor. I was a trained 5D, I trained people on it. It's not that it's bad. 5D is actually way better than a Charlotte Danielson, in my opinion. It involves some required discussion between the evaluator and the person being evaluated. So I'm not against evaluations in any way. 5D is actually pretty good, but the student growth piece, it's fine. The way it is at 20%, no more than that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And if I can just add really quick, I appreciate that you highlighted too the amount of, hopefully the amount of time that it'll be saving on the teacher's end and also on the administrator's end, which I think is an important piece that we don't want to forget in this, because I was not an administrator, but I had a lot of sympathy for my principals and vice principals who were spending what seemed like ungodly amount of time just going through and doing all this work, when again, to your point, I would have much rather them being able to be in the building, walking around, talking to kids, talking to teachers, which I'm sure they all would like to be doing more of as well.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions, and then I'm going to cap it at that for the senators because we still have 3 more people that would like to testify as well. So next up is Representative Glanville.
Thank you. And I hope I actually have 2 questions, so hopefully that's okay. The first one, I wanted to just return to this piece on misconduct. So, and this was brought to my attention, and so I just want to get some clarification around it. In the original bill, as I'm reading it, it just says, unprofessional conduct means 1 or more acts of misconduct, 1 or more acts of immorality, et cetera, et cetera. And so you've changed it from misconduct to acts that endanger the safety of any student, fine, and directly lead to the separation of employment. And there's been some question brought to me about this addition of and leading to separation of employment. The example given was a teacher who's drinking on the job. And an investigation is started, and teacher gets wind of it and leaves. So there is no actual separation, but there is misconduct. And so that seems to be a place where the superintendent or the principal might feel their hands are tied in terms of being able to share that information going forward if they're asked for a reference in the future or something along those lines. So I just wanted to, and I don't know if you have an answer for that today. Maybe it's something
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm willing to take a look at it. I mean, if someone's drinking on the job, that would be an appropriate behavior involving a minor. Maybe moral turpitude. I don't know.
Well, the question is just that
I understand
and
the
directly leads to
separation of employment part.
Yeah.
I mean, Dan?
So originally, when we were going over language, there's thought of termination, but then we find that a lot of districts, if someone has a behavior that is severe, that districts will they'll do a separation agreement with folks. And we wanted to make sure those folks were covered, that if a behavior was severe and it was leading to a potential separation agreement, that those folks would also fall into that category.
Okay. And what about folks who just leave?
Yeah.
Is that a separation agreement, or
that comes to where it's good for folks to look at the personnel files.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's what I just I just wanted to bring that forward. And then the other question I quickly have is in regards to the type of it's the ratings, and I chuckled a little bit because my primary experience is with Danielson.
Oh no, I've offended you. Please don't. Hold
No,
it
not
against me.
offended. Not offended at all. I was just kind of chuckling like, oh, I look kind of, but I haven't used the 5D. I'm sure they're very similar. I mean, a rubric is a rubric, right?
Yeah.
And teaching is teaching. So I'm sure they share many commonalities. But my point here being, is there an opportunity for a teacher to have ratings in different categories? So perhaps, they're really good at content knowledge, or they're really good at classroom management, and then they need improvement in another area. And in this system, would you be able to separate those out, or would it somehow come together as one blanket?
It would. You could separate it out in the Danielson or the 5D or whatever you used. I mean, it can be parsed and separated out however you want in that actual evaluation tool. But no, for the purposes of the final evaluation, the student growth plus the subjective, or what's now the 60%, would get you only one of 3.
Okay.
And this is something educators really, really wanted.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Wenzel.
Thank you. I'll be short-winded here. So it says that student growth is based on objective criteria multiple times throughout the bills as I was reading them. Can you just elaborate on what objective criteria is?
So let me just reference my notes here. Yeah, so this, for example, well, wait a second. So objective means things that can be measured. Subjective means things that can't be measured. So to me, it's all objective. Even the observation, feedback, dialogue, goal setting, to me, that's pretty objective. But then if you want to get really objective, you're going to use some sort of testing mechanism. So that would be the difference between objective and subjective. Does that answer your question? Is related to this. Ask it to me again.
Multiple times throughout the bills, when it would relate to student growth and how it was evaluated and the percentages, it would say this percentage is based on objective criteria. And that was just an odd, like, I didn't understand what objective criteria that is and who that's determined by, what that is. It just sounds very vague.
In that case, objective criteria would be some sort of testing mechanism, whether you're taking your student learning objectives or doing some sort of pre-post or even a benchmark testing. Those would all be objective measures. Yeah.
I think
That's what that means.
when I think of objective also, it's fair to say, like, for example, I taught AP Government and AP World History, and what I would do is I could take my AP test scores and talk about how the scores from a particular year would drive my instruction in the next year. Maybe I saw weakness in a particular spot, so I use that objective data in order to drive my instruction. Correct. Next up is Vice Chair Churches.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge, like, my appreciation for the fact that you were willing to look at something and see that the outcomes weren't matching the intention. And although, and just being very transparent about saying, like, this is what we can do. And within the parameters of what we can do, this is what we're going to try to do to try and start shifting this in a different direction. So I am very appreciative of all of the work and the transparency in this process. I think that the thing that has failed to be fully understood by all and by no one's ill intent is that the job of a teacher is very abstract. And an evaluation tool such as this in its creation as now is very concrete. And observations. It has been mentioned that you only have to go in twice a year. Once is scheduled, one can be unscheduled. This can shift it to 3. I have districts that only have to do 2 and they do 6. It is up to the district. This doesn't take the ability away to observe, to come in, to be a participant. It just doesn't, you don't have to do paperwork. So this is lightening a lot of paperwork for teachers who are doing their job. And if it is seen by an administrator who thinks that a teacher is failing to meet that criteria, they can start evaluating them again. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can do as many observations as you want.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And I noticed that it went from 40% to 20%, and these are summative tests, snapshots, as we call them as teachers. And a snapshot of a 5th grader on one test, and I don't know if everyone understands what the evaluation tool of an M-STEP looks like, but the results that you get back as a teacher are sometimes a green triangle, a yellow circle, a red square. And the evaluation tool that we're using in itself is not informing teachers and in their instruction in an appropriate way. But things that like mentorships, as you mentioned, or using this criteria that we're talking about where it's decided with teachers and someone else. So the criteria would be something like an iReady test or an NWEA test or an instructional round as determined by a district. Is that correct? So these measure student outcomes and sometimes up to 3 times a year. And I'm a different kind of teacher. I was like a very competitive teacher. I always wanted to win the pizza party. I just want to say, like, I like a contest. And I do believe it's important to be accountable. However, although I don't think this goes as far as I'd like it to go in the means of meeting the creativity that a classroom really encompasses. But would you say that having this criteria that can be determined amongst a district would enable teachers to focus on that other 80% of their time of coaching them, about realizing how to build relationships, how to meet the social emotional needs, how to coach them up in small group instruction of math and reading and writing? And would this make teachers possibly less afraid to experiment, make mistakes, and really strive for more instead of teaching to a test to achieve something? Because a lot of times we used tests, and we would teach the test because you're only assessing this little piece instead of really thinking, what are we going to do to create an environment for our learners to grow and succeed and excel in a competitive world that isn't based on a test, that's based on thinking outside of the box.
So I think you're exactly right. And the piece about the pivot from this, from what we have right now to where we want to go, is about loosening the constraints. So the old teacher evaluation system was so rigid and so prescriptive that of course teachers are in the place they're teaching to a test that they know isn't the right test to teach to, and they're moving in that direction, which is really limiting what happens in our classrooms. I don't know a single teacher that is not interested in understanding how their students are growing and whether or not what they're teaching in the classroom is sort of sinking in. But we know there's also ways to do it when we're talking about small group learning or project-based learning, and there are places where we can use things like portfolio assessments and start to get to mastery as opposed to just a simple regurgitation of some content, right? There's a way to do this. But if the state comes in and is so prescriptive in how those assessments are done in the classroom and then ties it to evaluation, we're not going to get that level of growth, particularly post-pandemic, when so many of our kids and, frankly, so many of our teachers are experiencing residual trauma from having gone through some really scary times, both from a health perspective and an equity perspective and a financial perspective. And so the idea is not in any way to say we are not interested in how students are growing and that teachers aren't interested in how students are growing. The idea is that we're putting something forward that trusts the education sector to figure out with teachers in the classroom how they know that their students are growing and then support them in their growth.
Is there a way that we can help districts decide what test is best? Because this criteria that they're using, there was misinterpretation here that those aren't specific enough. But if you do it, we're just testing more. So if you're doing that 3 NWEAs and an M-STEP and a Fontes and Pinnell, I think it's a lot.
To me, this is lessons from the education reform movement, right? Which I've spent 15 years in. That yes, we do need to support teachers in understanding that, and that needs to come from teachers and organizations that specialize in pedagogy and what's happening in the classroom. So I would say I do not want us to legislate that.
Okay. Representative, just so you know, the McDonald Rivet substitute prohibits the use of like high stakes MME suite of assessments in the student growth portion. It's going to be locally negotiated. Correct?
Matt subbed that language out, though.
Oh,
Yes, that was the beginning.
Locally,
Yep.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, senators and Dan. I know a lot of
this is
work
going
went
to be
into
called
this.
Dan's
Thank
Law
you
if it
for
ever becomes a
everything.
law.
With that, we do have wishing to testify Leah Porter, Holt Education Association 2021 Teacher of the Year. And Tammy Danzer from MEA.
Yes, thank you, Committee Chair and committee members, for letting us come and speak in front of you today. I have Leah Porter with us. She is a teacher in the Holt Education Association, and she was featured in the MEA Voice article in 2021, so she's been working with us around evaluation for quite some time. She was also the 2021-22 Michigan Teacher of the Year. We had a couple other members that were going to speak tonight. Ryan is listed on the sheet, but unfortunately Ryan also coaches wrestling, and so this evening he wasn't able to wait for us, so you can take him off of your list.
I think we have him on Zoom.
He was on Zoom, but his wrestlers are now in the weight room, and he can't leave them unsupervised. So
I wonder why. Fair enough.
But Ryan did provide his testimony, so you have a copy of that, as well as Megan Ake, who's a Fenton EA teacher, so you have their testimonies on file. I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
Thank you to the House Education Committee for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm here today to express my support for Senate Bill 395. I would like to share my own experiences around the teacher evaluation system and also give insight as a leader across the state who has been given the unique opportunity to experience school districts and teachers throughout Michigan. I just want to share before I get into that the teachers in this state are incredible. I have witnessed that countless times, and I'm truly in awe of their perseverance and care of students each day. The current teacher evaluation system is punitive and causes stress to countless teachers each year. Educators spend a great deal of time checking off boxes on an evaluation tool that does nothing to support their own growth or the growth of their students. Collaboration is at the heart of the teaching profession, and when a system is implemented that compares teachers based on snapshots of classroom instruction, leads to disconnect and competition between peers. We need an evaluation system that supports the growth of teachers and one that is conducted once a year or once every other year or every 3 years to ensure that those doing the evaluations can put the time, energy, and focus in those being evaluated. Before the current evaluation system, this was the structure in many districts. It provided educators the opportunity to work with their administrator in an area they wish to improve upon in their teaching practice, to take risks and be creative in their teaching. As someone who has experienced this system previous to the current system, it was an incredibly positive and collaborative experience that led to growth for myself and my students. The discrepancy within and across districts in how evaluations are conducted is alarming. I had the chance multiple times to speak to teachers about this. Streamlining effectiveness ratings by combining highly effective and effective scores allows for more consistent evaluations and provides a more straightforward system in identifying educators that need more support. Much of this evaluation process is out of the hands of the teachers because of the use of the standardized testing scores to determine student growth over the course of the school year. In the years leading up to and following the pandemic, the worry and concern teachers had experienced to get kids to pass the NSTEP test has been real, knowing that their student scores will not only impact their own evaluation, but some of their colleagues as well. These tests do not measure the growth of a learner, but instead show if a student has the prowess and experience to navigate a complex and challenging test. It does not showcase the learning gains of individual students that is built over the course of a school year. The system in its current form is ineffective, and it is time to reconfigure the evaluation process with Senate Bill 395. It is essential that changes be made that provide opportunities for teachers to grow and work collaboratively with their colleagues for the betterment of their students and learning structures. You know, after listening to the testifying tonight and listening to all of you, I do truly believe that everyone in this room cares deeply for the students in Michigan. Listening to the questioning tonight definitely gives me hope for the future of what we can do and the possibilities for our students. We all want to ensure that students are provided the greatest educational experience possible here in the state of Michigan. Making these necessary amendments to the current evaluation system is a continued affirmation to teachers across the state that the legislature in Lansing empathize and understand the complexities of the current educational landscape and want to build systems that will benefit students and provide teachers the opportunity to learn and grow in a way that will continue to develop their practice. Reimagining this evaluation system will make the process more meaningful for the educator and non-punitive, which will enhance collaboration for all and make a positive impact on every student across Michigan. Thank you for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for everything you do as well. We have a question from Representative Wagella. Oh, sorry, Dan.
I do have a question at the end of this, but hopefully I get some leeway here. I think this is really interesting what we're doing because I just was reading and looking, student growth. I'm going to talk specifically about student growth metric. It jumped one. We didn't have one, I think, at all before 2011, if I'm not mistaken. Then it went from 50% to 25 to 40%. Meanwhile, if you look at our test scores throughout that time, it really didn't change the outcome. So while I really think this legislation is a great step in the right direction, I'm a little bit frustrated that I think most educators on this committee, we know that student growth, the way we measure student growth right now is not good. And I think hopefully we take another look at this in the future. That doesn't mean I'm not going to support the legislation, because I do. But standardized tests don't measure things accurately. They do tell us how students perform on standardized tests. And the point I'm going to make here is, if you look at other countries and you compare the United States, right? You have Finland, where they have no mandatory tests until senior year. They outperform the United States. South Korea, I lived there and taught there. They have very, very strict standardized test procedures. And they outperform the United States. And then Singapore has almost scripted classes, and they outperform the United States. All of this tells us one thing. Because those are vastly different ways to approach education. It tells us that, what we're talking about with student success isn't about test scores. And our obsession with data in education has, I think, there's a fallacy there that we can actually measure that. What it's really about is economics. If you look at all three of those countries and compare them to the United States, they have a much lower child poverty rate, which is what I believe has a stronger outcome on student success. But what I love about this bill is that the current system is bad for students, right? And it's bad for educators. We're talking about educators, but really what we're talking about is it's bad for kids, because educators are losing creativity. They are teaching to the test. There's extra pressure on them. They're teaching, multiple choice sometimes rather than critical thinking, and we're losing engagement. So in a roundabout way, my question is this. Where do we go from here? Because I think this is a great start, but how do we actually reform the way we measure growth? And I know that's a question we all have, and I don't want to put that on you, but I think it'd be interesting to hear the perspective of an educator.
Thank you. I fully agree with everything you were saying. I believe that this bill definitely moves the needle and continues to move looking at our system in a positive way. That, I think, is a much more loaded question than maybe I can answer tonight. But one of the things that I was thinking about as you were speaking is really thinking about the piece we've talked about many times, which is collaboration. You are talking as well about students that are coming from a wide range of abilities, home life structures. Senator Polanki talked about that some. What we really need is more time for educators to work collaboratively. If we wanted to really get into the nitty-gritty of that, when we're talking about sub-issues, when we're talking about people that are having to cover during their planning time that is already precious enough, they don't get enough of it. We aren't really given the amount of time that we need to really develop in collaboration in that way. I think if you were to look at other countries across the world, you would see that they have different structures built that aren't necessarily built around work schedules for schools, but also in mind of how to best implement education and give teachers the time and autonomy to develop quality education for their individual students. So my short answer to that is that we need to continue to push making sure that teachers have not only quality professional development, but time to work with their grade level colleagues or their content level colleagues in a way that provides creativity. And some of that too is allowing that time to develop curriculum in a way that services the students that are in front of them in their classrooms.
Now really, I will also just, we have about 5 minutes left, so.
Wow, Leah did a great job. I also you did fantastic. I also want to add to that the 20% is going to be based on local measures. So you're going to have to go back and in consultation with teachers and administrators decide how you're going to develop that. I think that moves us in the right direction as well. And if I could take just a few minutes more, I wanted to address some of the questions that were asked earlier.
We got about 4 minutes. So.
Representative Stone, I wanted to let you know that the individual development plan does have a format in which the teacher and the administrator have to devise some plan for professional development. So I think that answered your question. The other questions, they're not here to hear my answers, so I will relinquish the mic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. No other questions. Thank you so much. Oh no, you're all set. To close here, I do want to thank colleagues on both sides of the aisle, as well as our sponsors and everybody for attending a later committee. I know it's getting late, so I just want to say thank you to all of you. Representative Johnson moves to excuse absent members without objection, so ordered. And there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.